They didn't even let me breathe. The judge hadn't finished reading the sentence when I felt the cold metal of the handcuffs clamped down on my wrists. 2 officers grabbed me by the arms and pulled me up like I was a criminal. I wasn't even allowed to hug my wife. I turned my head, searching for her in the courtroom, expecting to see desperation in her eyes, maybe even tears. But what I saw instead was a slight nod. And then she looked at him, the man who was supposed to defend me, my lawyer, and, in that moment, something shattered deep inside me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a complete erasure of who I thought I was in her life. The look they exchanged was short, but it told an entire story. It was the look of 2 people who had been planning something for a long time. I had trusted her with my life. I had trusted him to save it. And now both stood silently, watching me get taken away like trash. I couldn't scream. I couldn't fight. I couldn't even ask why. Because deep down, I already knew. The courtroom was almost empty, except for a few people sitting in the back, whispering. I was just another immigrant being processed, another number in a system that moves too fast to care about who it destroys. But for me, this wasn't just a deportation. It was the collapse of everything I had built over 17 years in this country. A life of sacrifice, of hard work, of silent endurance, gone in minutes. As I was dragged through the hallway, I could still hear the judge's voice, echoing in my head. Removal order, effective immediately. I didn't even have time to call anyone. Not a friend, not my boss, not even my mother. 1 minute I was a man with a home, a wife, a routine. The next, I was an undocumented body in custody, stripped of my name and rights. They put me into the back of a van. No explanation, no time to process, just the sound of the doors slamming shut behind me. Inside, there were no windows, just darkness, and the silence of the other men being transported. Some prayed quietly, others stared at the floor. I just kept thinking about the way she looked at him, my wife, my partner, the woman I had married in good faith. She had promised to stand by me, in sickness, in health, in war, but not in court. And the lawyer, the one I paid thousands to, he had shown up late to the hearing, forgot documents, mumbled through my defense like he had somewhere better to be. Now it made sense. He did have somewhere else to be. He had her, and I was the only one who hadn't realized it. The betrayal burned more than the fear of deportation. It was like being buried alive by people you loved. And worst of all, I had no one to tell, no voice to scream with. My words wouldn't matter now. To them, I was already gone. At the holding facility, they took everything. My belt, my phone, even my shoelaces. They gave me a jumpsuit that didn't fit, and a number I was supposed to memorize. Number 74. That's who I was now. Not Daniel Monteiro. Not a husband. Not a worker. Not a taxpayer. Just 74. I was put in a cell with 3 other men. One had been arrested while picking up his daughter from school. Another had been turned in by his own brother after a family argument. The third, he didn't even speak English. He just cried. All of us carried the same weight. Not just the fear of being sent back, but the shame of how it happened. As I lay on the hard metal bunk that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. My wife and that man. Laughing maybe. Celebrating. I wondered if they were in our house now, if they were in our bed. I wondered if she had planned this for weeks, or if it had all been a last-minute betrayal. But what haunted me most was not knowing if she had ever loved me at all. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal so deep it took your breath away, I want you to comment below. Just write, "I know how that feels," because sometimes knowing we're not alone in our pain is the only comfort we have. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, subscribe to this channel. Every voice matters, even the ones they try to silence. My name is Daniel Monteiro. I am 41 years old, and for 17 of those years, I lived in the United States. I was not born here, but this country had become more than just a place I lived. It was home, or at least, that is what I used to believe. I arrived in 2008 with nothing but a backpack, a crumpled photo of my mother, and a head full of dreams. I stepped off that Greyhound bus in San Antonio, believing that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet, and followed the rules, I could build something real. And for a while, I did. I started like many immigrants do, at the bottom. My first job was washing dishes in a small Mexican restaurant on the east side of town. I worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for $8 an hour. It was brutal. My hands were constantly soaked, my skin cracked from the soap. I remember using plastic grocery bags as gloves, just to make it through a shift. But I never complained. Every paycheck, no matter how small, felt like proof that I belonged. Over time, I learned to fix things around the restaurant. I became the guy who unclogged the sinks, changed the lights, fixed the freezer. The owners started calling me Mr. Do-It-All. I took pride in that. Eventually, I found side work repairing appliances for neighbors. I learned to drive, got my own car. I never had a license, but I drove carefully, always taking the IB fee, back roads, avoiding attention. My life was small, cautious, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. What people don't realize is that when you live in the shadows, everything becomes more meaningful. A Friday night off, a cheap pizza, a text from your mother back home saying she's proud of you. These are not just moments, they are victories. I didn't have luxury, but I had purpose. I sent money back to Brazil every month, helped pay for my sister's medication, paid off my father's funeral. You are far from home. Family becomes your reason for breathing. Then came her, Allison. She worked at the hospital as a technician. I was doing some maintenance work when we met. She dropped her clipboard. I picked it up. She smiled. Simple as that. And from that moment, I was caught in something I didn't expect. Love. Real love. Or what I thought was real. She was different, funny, kind. She said my accent was charming. Called me sunshine because she said I made her day brighter. Felt like stepping into another world. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. We went to parks. We tried every taco truck in the city. She introduced me to her friends. She even took me to meet her parents, who were surprisingly warm and accepting. I thought, this is it. I have made it. We got married a year later in a small courthouse ceremony. I wore a borrowed suit. She wore a yellow dress. She cried when we said our vows. So did I. We moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment and filled it with hand-me-down furniture and dreams of the future. She wanted to go back to school. I wanted to start a handyman business. We made plans, talked about kids, about maybe buying a house someday. It was the happiest I had ever been. But happiness has a way of making you blind. I started noticing things after our second year together. She worked longer hours, started coming home with excuses, meetings, traffic. A friend needed her. Sometimes she would shower immediately, after getting home, without saying a word. Other nights, she would lie in bed, facing away from me, her phone lighting up the room with messages she said were from coworkers. I wanted to ask more, but I was afraid of the answers. You see, when your whole life depends on staying quiet, you learn to ignore signs. You learn to give people the benefit of the doubt, even when everything inside you is screaming. Because the truth might not just break your heart, it might destroy the little world you've built. Still, I tried to believe in us. I surprised her with flowers one day after work. She barely looked at them. I made dinner, her favorite pasta. She said she wasn't hungry. She started locking her phone. Then came the lies. Small at first, then bigger. Until one night, I found a hotel key in her purse. She said it was from a friend. Said she was helping her through a divorce. I nodded, pretended to believe. But something inside me cracked. And yet, I stayed. Because I had promised her. Forever. Because I thought marriage was about holding on, even when it hurts. I thought love was sacrifice. What I didn't know is that sometimes love is just a mirror, showing you how much of yourself you are willing to lose to keep someone who already walked away. If you have ever stayed longer than you should have, if you have ever ignored the signs because you believed love could fix it, I want to hear your story in the comments. Just write, I stayed because I believed. And if these words echo something inside you, consider subscribing to this channel. We share true stories that deserve to be felt. You are not alone. The signs were there. Looking back now, I can see them clearly. But at the time, I was too in love to notice. Or maybe I noticed and just didn't want to believe it. That is the thing about love. It makes you justify the cracks until the entire foundation gives out beneath you. In the beginning, everything felt like a movie. The kind where the immigrant boy meets the meter, all-American girl, and they defy the odds. We were that couple. At least I thought we were. She used to leave little notes for me on the fridge. Good luck today, sunshine. Dinner's on me tonight. And every now and then, she'd bring home something small, a snack she knew I liked, a mug that said, "World's Best Husband." These weren't expensive gifts, but they meant something to me. They were proof that she saw me, that I mattered. But over time, those notes stopped. The dinners stopped. Even her smile started to feel forced. At first, I blamed stress. She had taken on more hours at the hospital. She talked a lot about a new legal team they had brought in, said they were trying to reduce malpractice risks, reviewing patient files, auditing procedures. She mentioned one lawyer in particular, said he was smart, confident, great at what he did. I remember smiling and saying, "You're impressed." She laughed and said I was being jealous. I wasn't jealous. I was curious. I trusted her. But something about the way she said his name stuck with me, like it had a different weight in her mouth. Then came the late nights, the missed calls, the excuses. One night she came home after 11. Her scrubs smelled like cologne. She said she had to help a coworker after a car accident, and that they hugged her because they were scared. I wanted to believe that, so I did. I nodded and kissed her forehead. But inside, something shifted. One Saturday, she said she was going shopping with a friend. I stayed home fixing the faucet in the kitchen. When I took the trash out, I noticed her purse still on the table. She never left her purse. I don't know what made me open it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was heartbreak, looking for a reason. Inside, among the receipts and old gum wrappers, was a hotel key card, not from a chain we ever stayed at, one of those local boutique places where people go to disappear for a night. I sat down on the couch and stared at it for a long time. When she came back, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just asked her how her day was. She said fine, and kissed me like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. I started noticing other things. Her phone was always face down. She changed her passcode. She used to laugh at the shows we watched together. Now she stared at her screen, barely reacting. When I brought up having kids, she brushed it off, said the world was too crazy right now. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but the distance between us was growing, like a silent wall neither of us wanted to name. One afternoon, I came home early from a job. She wasn't expecting me. Her car was in the driveway, and I found her in the bedroom on the phone. She looked startled when I walked in, ended the call too quickly, said it was her mother, but her mother's voice never sounded like a man's. I let it go, or at least I pretended to. Then came the day I found the business card. It was in the glove compartment of our car, tucked underneath a receipt. It had his name, the lawyer she had mentioned, the same man who would later stand beside me in court, pretending to defend me. At the time, I didn't connect the dots. I just thought it was odd. She said he had asked for a ride once, that he forgot his card in the car. The lie was so thin, it barely covered the truth. From then on, the tension between us became unbearable. We still ate dinner together, but in silence. We slept in the same bed, but it felt colder than any winter I had ever known. I would wake up in the middle of the night and see her scrolling through her phone, her screen glowing in the dark like a secret she refused to share. I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying to hold on. It was like hugging smoke. No matter how tight you squeeze, it slips right through your fingers. What I didn't know was that this wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was the beginning of a trap, one I wouldn't see fully until it was too late. She had planted him in my life, recommended him as a legal advisor when immigration started tightening up, said he was trustworthy, that he had helped friends of hers. I had no reason to doubt her. She was my wife. Why would she set me up? If you've ever been betrayed by someone who looked you in the eye and swore they loved you, I want you to share your truth in the comments. Just write, "I trusted the wrong person." And if stories like this speak to something you've lived through, consider subscribing. This is a space for those who have been hurt, but who refuse to stay silent. You matter. Your pain matters. And you are not alone. It arrived in a plain envelope. No warning, no phone call, no chance to prepare. A thin letter from the Department of Homeland Security that looked so ordinary, I almost threw it out with the junk mail. But when I opened it, my hands started to shake. It was a notice to appear, They were asking me to present myself before an immigration judge. No date yet, just a case number, just a line that said I was under review for potential removal proceedings. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at those words. My wife wasn't home. She had taken an overnight shift at the hospital, or at least that's what she said. My mind ran wild. I had no criminal record, no trouble with the law. I paid taxes, even without a social security number. I had a steady job, a wife, a lease, and bills in my name. I had built a quiet life. Nothing flashy. Nothing that should raise any flags. But none of that mattered. All it took was one notice to remind me that I had always been one step away from being erased. When Allison got home the next morning, I told her. She didn't act surprised. She blinked a few times, sat down with her coffee, and said, "That's happening to a lot of people right now. We'll get you a good lawyer." Just like that. No panic. No real fear. It should have comforted me, but something about how calm she was made me feel colder inside. That same week, she handed me a business card. I recognized the name instantly. It was the same man she had mentioned months before. The one she said worked at her hospital. The one whose card I had found in the car. She said he specialized in immigration defense and had helped several nurses' families avoid deportation. I was hesitant, but I was also desperate. And when you're staring at a legal system you don't fully understand, you cling to the people who claim to know it. He met with us in a downtown office, sleek, modern, filled with leather chairs and law books that looked untouched. He smiled at Allison more than he looked at me, but I ignored it. He shook my hand with too much confidence and said, "Don't worry, Daniel. We've seen this before. We'll handle it." He asked for my documents, my marriage certificate, proof of residence, tax records, photos of our life together. He called it evidence of good moral character. I brought everything, stacks of papers, pay stubs, even birthday cards my in-laws had sent me. He barely glanced at them, said he'd go over everything before the hearing, that I should stay calm, that these cases could take years. At home, I tried to stay positive. I looked up success stories online, people who had beaten deportation, people who had used marriage as a valid defense. I thought, this could be me. This will be me. But while I was collecting hope, Allison was growing distant. She stopped asking how I was feeling. She started taking calls in the other room. And when I tried to talk about the future, she said things like, "Let's just wait and see what happens." Weeks passed, then months. A court date finally came in the mail. My name, my case number, my date with a system that didn't know me and didn't care what I had built. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional cough from the neighbor's apartment. I kept rehearsing what I would say. I would tell them about my job, about the apartment I helped pay for, about the years I spent contributing to a country that never fully welcomed me. I even planned to talk about my dream of opening my own handyman business. But the words felt useless, like bricks building a wall no one wanted to see. At breakfast, Allison barely looked at me. She said she couldn't come to court, that she had been scheduled for an emergency shift. I asked her to try and switch it. She said she would try, but deep down, I already knew she wouldn't be there. When I arrived at the courthouse, my lawyer was already waiting. He looked impatient, like he had somewhere else to be. I handed him a few last documents I had gathered. He stuffed them into his folder without even looking. "Let's go," he said. "They don't like delays." Inside, the courtroom was small and cold. The judge looked tired. The government lawyer looked bored. My lawyer spoke fast, with none of the conviction I had hoped for. He didn't mention my marriage until the judge brought it up. He fumbled with my paperwork, forgot the date of our wedding, didn't submit the photos I had carefully labeled and printed. I kept looking at him, waiting for him to defend me, but he avoided my eyes. And then the judge made a decision. He said the case lacked compelling evidence to suspend removal, that unless new material was submitted, he would issue an order for my deportation at the next hearing. My lawyer nodded, like he had expected it, and in that moment, I knew he had never fought for me. He was just collecting a check. Outside the courtroom, I asked him what had gone wrong. He shrugged, said it was a tough system, that we would try again. I asked about submitting more evidence. He told me not to worry, but I was already drowning. And that night, when I got home, Allison wasn't there. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her car was gone. There was no note, just a silence that filled every corner of the apartment. The same apartment I had painted myself. The same one where I thought we'd raise a family. If you've ever felt abandoned at the worst possible moment, I want you to share your truth. Just type, "They left when I needed them most." And if this story reflects something you've lived, take a moment to subscribe. These stories are real, and maybe, just maybe, someone else hearing yours will finally feel seen. The morning of the hearing, I could barely breathe. I had pressed my only dress shirt the night before, smoothing every wrinkle as if it would somehow protect me from the chaos that was coming. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, willing myself to stay calm. I wasn't just going to court. I was walking into a room where people would decide whether or not I had the right to exist in the only life I had ever built. Allison was nowhere to be found. Her side of the bed was empty, cold. I checked my phone. No message, no missed call, nothing. I stood in the doorway for a moment, hoping I'd hear her keys or the sound of her voice telling me it was all going to be okay. But the silence answered for her. The courthouse felt like a different world. Everyone was in a hurry. Lawyers juggling folders, people crying quietly in corners, families holding hands like they were standing in front of a firing squad. I had never seen so many people who looked so afraid. It smelled like paper and sweat, that kind of bureaucratic anxiety that sticks to your clothes. My lawyer showed up 15 minutes late. No apology. He was on the phone when he walked in, laughing at something. I stood when I saw him. He waved me down like I was bothering him. "Relax. They're running behind," he said. I tried to hand him a letter I had written. Something personal. Something that explained who I was. He barely glanced at it before sliding it into his folder without a word. I should have walked away right then. But I didn't. I still believed he would show up for me when it mattered. When they called my name, my knees went weak. I had to swallow hard to keep from throwing up. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No jury, just the judge, the government attorney, my so-called lawyer, and me. My entire life reduced to a few people and a file. The judge was an older man with sharp glasses and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. The government lawyer read through my file like it was a grocery list, entered it into the record. Then it was my lawyer's turn. He cleared his throat, shuffled through his papers like he had never seen them before, and began speaking in that rehearsed tone that felt more like he was auditioning than defending me. He mentioned that I was married, that I had lived here for over a decade, that I had no criminal record, but he didn't present my documents, didn't show the photos, didn't explain our relationship. He didn't mention that I had paid taxes or that I had been working non-stop for years. He just stood there, speaking vaguely, like I was some case file that had landed on his desk 5 minutes ago. I watched the judge take notes, watched the government attorney raise an eyebrow, and I knew I was in trouble. Then the judge asked, "Is your spouse here today?" I froze. I looked at the empty seat beside me and felt my face flush with shame. "No, Your Honor," I said softly. The judge nodded once. No emotion, just a check mark in a mental box labeled red flag. The rest of the hearing moved fast. My lawyer offered no real argument. He didn't push back on anything. He didn't even ask for more time to gather stronger evidence. He just let the case slide into the abyss. The judge said he would review everything and issue a decision at the next hearing. But his tone told me the decision was already made. Outside the courtroom, I finally confronted him. "Why didn't you show the documents? Why didn't you say anything about our life?" He shrugged. Actually shrugged, like it was a minor inconvenience. "This isn't a strong case, Daniel. Marriage alone doesn't win anymore. They want hardship, kids, citizen relatives. You don't have that." Then he looked at his watch and said, "I have to be across town. We'll talk later." He walked away before I could say another word. I just stood there in the hallway, holding my folder like a fool. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was rage, not just at him, at myself, for trusting the wrong people, for letting someone else speak for me when I should have been screaming my own story. I took the bus home in silence. The city passed by like a blur of faces and buildings I might never see again. When I walked into the apartment, it felt hollow. Her things were still there, but she wasn't. Her jacket hung on the hook. Her coffee mug was in the sink, but she hadn't called, not once, not even to ask how it went. I sat on the couch, and stared at the floor for what felt like hours. The sun dipped below the buildings outside, and the room went dark. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I just existed. Barely. If you've ever been in a room where someone else made decisions about your life without ever truly knowing who you are, I want you to share that feeling. Just write, "They didn't even see me." And if this story has touched you, consider subscribing. These are not just words. They are wounds. And maybe, by sharing them, we can help someone else feel less alone in the silence. When they came for me, it was early. The sun had not yet climbed over the rooftops. I was still in bed when the pounding started. Not a knock, not a courtesy, just fists against wood like they were breaking into a criminal's hideout. I remember the way my heart jumped into my throat. I thought it was a mistake, or maybe a neighbor. But when I opened the door, I saw the uniforms, I saw the badges, and I knew. They did not yell, they did not explain. One of them simply asked, "Are you Daniel Monteiro?" And when I said yes, the handcuffs came out. They let me put on shoes. That was the only kindness. They didn't let me call anyone. Not my wife, not a lawyer, not a friend. I was a case file now, a body to be processed. They drove me in a black van with no windows in the back, just a hard metal bench and silence. I sat across from a man I had never seen before. He was crying softly, rocking back and forth. He had a tattoo of a child's name on his wrist. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We were both ghosts now, no longer part of the world outside. The detention center looked like a warehouse from the outside, gray, cold, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with loops of razor wire. Inside, it was even worse. Fluorescent lights flickered. The air smelled like sweat and bleach. Everything was loud and hollow. Footsteps echoed. Doors slammed. People shouted in languages I barely understood. They took my shoelaces, my belt, my phone. They gave me a beige uniform with a number stitched across the chest. That number was mine now. I was not Daniel. I was 031742. That is how they called me. That is how they labeled my food tray. That is what they wrote down when I asked for Tylenol. My cell had 4 bunks, but 6 men. 2 slept on mats on the floor. The toilet was in the open, just a few feet from the beds. There was no privacy, no peace, just the constant hum of fear. Every night, someone cried. Sometimes it was me. We rotated who got the top. We shared toothpaste. We traded stories like they were cigarettes. Some of the men had been there for months. One had been there almost a year. He said he was still waiting for a hearing. I stopped asking questions after that. Food came 3 times a day, if you could call it that. Watery rice, gray meat, sometimes a banana if you were lucky. One man kept the banana stickers and lined them up on the wall like trophies. Said it helped him count the days. Said it reminded him he was still human. There was a TV in the common area, bolted to the wall behind plexiglass. It played English news at full volume. No one really watched. It just filled the space. Sometimes the guards left it on cartoons. We all stared at those the most, like children. Like it helped us pretend for a few minutes that the world was still soft and colorful. There were fights. Tensions ran high. One guy got jumped over a stolen packet of sugar. Another got put in isolation for yelling too loud when he found out his wife had filed for divorce. He screamed her name all night, even after they dragged him out. We took turns using the phones. They charged $5 for 5 minutes. I tried calling Allison. She didn't answer. I tried again the next day. Voicemail. I left a message, told her where I was, asked her to come. The message was never returned. I stopped trying after the 5th call. There was a man in my unit named Jose. He was from Honduras. Spoke English better than I did. Said he had worked in construction for 10 years. He had 2 daughters, both born in the States. One night, he told me his wife had been pregnant with their 3rd when he was taken. She gave birth while he was in custody. He hadn't held the baby yet. He showed me a photo someone had smuggled in, a blurry printout from a black and white printer. He kissed it every night before sleeping. That photo was his oxygen. It was Jose who told me to stay strong, who told me to keep my head down and not talk too much. He said the walls had ears, that some guards liked to provoke, that if you gave them a reason, they would use it. He had seen it happen. More than once. Every Thursday, a woman came in offering legal help. Her name was Clara. She was small, always wearing a gray cardigan and holding a notepad thicker than the Bible. She was one of the only people who looked us in the eye. She offered to listen. Most people didn't trust her at first, but I did. When I sat across from her that first time, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead, I just talked. For the first time in weeks, I said my name out loud. I told her about my life, about Allison, about the court, about the lawyer who barely spoke for me. She wrote everything down, nodded slowly. Then she looked up and said, "This doesn't sound right. We're going to dig deeper." For the first time since they took me, I felt something that almost resembled hope. A flicker, faint, fragile, but it was there. If you've ever felt erased, if you've been reduced to a number or a file while screaming silently for someone to notice you, I want to hear from you. Write, "I still exist," in the comments. And if these stories feel like your own, or like someone you love, subscribe to this channel, because voices like ours are often buried, and together we can dig them back out. Clara kept coming back, week after week, always with her notebook and quiet determination. She was not like the others. She didn't speak to us like we were broken. She didn't rush through our stories or talk over our pain. She listened, not just to the words, but to the silences between them. The moments we hesitated, the details we left out, and it was in those silences that she found pieces of truth that others had ignored. When I told her about the lawyer, she asked for his name again. I spelled it out for her. She asked if I remembered the dates of our meetings, how much I had paid him, whether I had receipts or messages. I didn't have everything, but I had enough. Then she asked about Allison. I hesitated. I told her about the distance, the coldness, the nights she didn't come home, about the hotel key and the lies. Clara leaned in slightly, lowered her voice, and said, "Daniel, has anyone ever asked if your marriage was genuine?" That question hit me like a slap. It had never occurred to me that anyone would doubt that. Not until that moment. Not even after everything I had already endured. I stared at the floor, ashamed, embarrassed, and unsure how to answer. But Clara didn't push. She waited. And then I said, "I believed it was. At least I did. In the beginning." That was the truth, as painful as it was. She nodded gently. "That might be enough. We can work with that." Over the next few days, Clara started gathering pieces. She requested transcripts, filed formal complaints. She asked me to write everything I could remember. Every message, every place we went, every photo we took. I wrote until my hands cramped. I asked Jose to help me translate a few words into legal terms. He used to be a paralegal in Honduras, said he had done immigration paperwork before he was detained. It's strange how people carry entire professions inside them, even when they're treated like they are nothing. Clara also spoke to the guards. One of them, Officer Ramirez, said he had overheard a conversation between another detainee and one of the lawyers who often visited. Something about cutting deals, about cases that were being intentionally mishandled to speed up deportation for profit. Clara's face darkened when she heard that. She asked for names. Ramirez wouldn't give them, but he promised to write a statement. In the meantime, something inside me began to shift. I started sitting up straighter. I started looking people in the eye again. Not because I thought I would be saved, but because for the first time in months, someone was fighting for me like I mattered. Like my story wasn't just paperwork, like my name still meant something. I shared my meals with Jose. I helped a younger detainee from El Salvador write a letter to his mom. I cleaned the bathroom voluntarily, just to keep my mind busy. I still had nightmares, still woke up sweating, thinking I had missed a court date or been forgotten, but I was starting to feel human again. One morning, Clara brought a folder with documents and handed it to the front desk for my review. Inside were affidavits, statements from co-workers, emails I had long forgotten about, photos of Allison and me from the early days, at the park, at her cousin's wedding, holding sparklers on the 4th of July. We looked happy in those photos, genuinely happy. I stared at them for a long time, remembering how much I had loved her and how much I had wanted it to last. Then I found something else, a printout of a financial transaction, a retainer payment from my account to the lawyer. A second one, just weeks later, deposited into a different account, one connected to Allison's name. My stomach turned. Clara had found a paper trail. I had been paying for my own betrayal. She didn't want to say it out loud, but I could see it in her eyes. Allison had set me up. Whether she was coerced or complicit didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the pattern, the silence, the distance, the way everything had been timed perfectly. My court hearing, her disappearing act, the fake defense, the discarded evidence. We both knew what it meant. Fraud, conspiracy, possibly even criminal. Clara said she would file a motion to reopen my case and request an independent investigation. It wouldn't be easy. The system doesn't like to admit it made a mistake, but it was something, a real shot. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe there might still be a way out. That night, I wrote in my journal. I had started keeping one on scraps of paper, taping them together with commissary glue. I wrote, "Today I saw proof, not just of what they did to me, but of who I am becoming." If you've ever doubted your worth because someone tried to erase you, I want you to write these words in the comments. I still matter. And if this story has spoken to your spirit, I invite you to subscribe. Not because we want followers, but because we want community. Because when voices like ours come together, silence no longer has the final word. The day they called my name again, something in the way the guard said it was different. Not rushed, not careless. He paused for a second, just enough to make me notice. I stood slowly, my hands already trembling, unsure if this was the moment I would be put on a plane or handed a second chance. They took me to a separate room. No shackles this time, just a small, windowless space with a metal table and 2 chairs. Clara was already inside, waiting for me. Her eyes met mine, and I knew something had shifted, something important. She slid a document across the table. It was a motion, a formal request to reopen my case. Evidence. But it wasn't just the evidence we had discussed. It included a signed affidavit from Officer Ramirez. He had gone on record about the lawyer, about conversations he overheard, about names he recognized. He had nothing to gain from it, no incentive. He simply wanted to do what was right. That, Clara said, made it powerful. There was also a sealed letter addressed to the judge. Clara had written it herself. It wasn't filled with legal jargon. It was a human plea. She described me, my work ethic, my life, the betrayal I had faced. She described how I was handed to the system by the very person who vowed to protect me. Her words were like a mirror. I barely recognized myself in them, not because they were false, but because they reminded me of who I had been before everything fell apart. She told me the motion had been submitted, that the judge had 15 days to respond, that in the meantime, I would stay where I was. I nodded. I had learned not to hope too much, but the flicker inside me was still alive, and for the first time in months, it felt stronger than the fear. The next few days passed differently. People around me noticed. I wasn't slumped over in corners anymore. I spoke more, laughed even. Jose teased me about it, said I walked like someone who had remembered his name again. I told him it was Clara, that sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to let your story end the way others expect. We played cards in the evening, taught each other words in our native languages. He taught me a Honduran folk song. I taught him a Brazilian proverb. We became more than detainees. We became brothers in survival. Then came the hearing. It was held via video conference, a giant screen in a dull gray room. The judge appeared in high resolution, every wrinkle on his face deepened by the harsh lighting. My heart thudded like a drum inside my chest. Clara stood beside me, calm, focused. She began her statement with quiet strength, presented the new evidence methodically, the financial records, the recorded calls, Officer Ramirez's affidavit, my written testimony, the photos, the patterns, the manipulation. She didn't dramatize, she didn't plead. She let the truth do the talking. The government attorney, a woman I had never seen before, looked surprised by the volume of evidence. She paused to read, flipping through the pages with growing discomfort. She did not object, not once. The judge was silent for a long time. Then he adjusted his glasses and said something that nearly made my knees give out. He said, based on the evidence, there was reason to believe the initial proceedings had been compromised, that the legal representation I had received may not have acted in good faith, that the relationship central to the case may have involved elements of fraud, but not on my part. He paused again and said he was ordering the case reopened and granting a temporary stay of removal until a full review could be completed. Clara put a hand on my shoulder. I didn't move. I couldn't. It felt like the room had collapsed around me, but in the most silent, dignified way. I was still detained, still not free, but something had broken loose. A crack in the wall, and light was coming through. The guards walked me back slowly. One of them, a man I had never seen smile before, whispered, "Looks like someone finally listened." I nodded, but my throat was tight. No words came. Back in the unit, I sat on my bunk, closed my eyes. The others asked questions. Some clapped. Jose hugged me, but I just sat there, absorbing it. Not the victory, but the moment of being heard. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I didn't need to. The words were already inside me, pulsing like a heartbeat. I thought about my mother, about how she used to tell me that justice moves like a river underground. You don't see it, you don't hear it, but it carves everything in its path. If you have ever waited too long to be seen, too long to be believed, I want you to share those words in the comments. Someone finally heard me. And if you felt anything while listening to this part of my story, subscribe to this channel. Not just to follow a journey, but to remind yourself that even in silence, you are never truly alone. Every sound in the detention center echoed a little differently after that hearing. The doors didn't slam quite as loud. The lights didn't flicker quite as cruelly. I wasn't free, not yet, but I had a date now. A hearing with real weight, one where my voice would matter. Clara said the judge ordered a full review. That meant depositions, evidence submissions, witnesses. It meant we had to rebuild my case from the ground up, but this time with eyes wide open. We began collecting letters, statements from people who knew me. My old boss at the auto shop sent one. He wrote about how I once worked 16 straight hours during a storm to help a family stranded on the highway. He said I never asked for a raise, never missed a shift, never caused trouble. That I showed up like clockwork, that I deserved better than what the system had done to me. Another came from a neighbor, Miss Eleanor, a retired teacher who used to bring me cookies during the holidays. He wrote about how I helped her change light bulbs when her arthritis flared up, how I carried her groceries. She said she once saw me crying in the hallway after Allison locked me out, that I didn't even know she had seen. Her words were soft but full of truth. Each letter felt like a stitch, sewing back the pieces of a life I had almost forgotten was mine. But not everything was healing. A few days after the hearing, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. It was from Allison, just 3 short pages. She said she was sorry, that she had made mistakes, that the lawyer had manipulated her, that she had not known what would happen to me. She said she missed who we used to be. I read that letter 10 times. Each time, it made less sense. She had helped destroy my life, and now she missed the version of me that existed before she betrayed it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Clara warned me that things might get worse before they got better, that exposing fraud came with risks. The former lawyer could try to discredit us, could deny everything. She said people in power rarely admit fault without a fight. She was right. A week later, my old lawyer filed a response. He denied any wrongdoing, said I was unstable, that I had fabricated documents, that our meetings were always professional, that I was trying to cover up an invalid marriage with a conspiracy theory. It was cruel, deliberate. He included messages between him and Allison. Some were real, most were incomplete. Clara told me not to panic, but I did. Because in the eyes of the court, perception can be stronger than truth. We pushed back. Clara submitted voice messages I had saved, photos with time stamps, copies of financial transfers. She compiled a full timeline, showing the inconsistencies in their story. She didn't just build a defense, she built a narrative, one that showed how I was manipulated, used, silenced. The days inside felt longer. I stopped counting them. Instead, I measured time in Clara's visits, in how many new documents she brought, in the questions she asked. What color were Allison's eyes the first time you knew she didn't love you anymore? What did your lawyer do when you mentioned the hotel? What exact words did he use the day of your hearing? Those questions hurt, but they were necessary. Truth, I learned, is not just about facts. It's about texture, about memory, about making someone else feel what you felt, down to the bone. Jose stayed by my side through all of it. He had his own pain, his own hearing, but he said fighting for me made his time feel worth something. He even helped Clara translate testimonies from other detainees who had been mistreated by the same lawyer. It wasn't just my case anymore. It was a pattern, a network of negligence and deceit. Then something unexpected happened. One of the guards, a man named Dean, started stopping by our unit more often. At first I thought he was watching us, maybe even trying to intimidate us. But one day, he pulled me aside, said his cousin had been deported 3 years ago, wrongfully, said he knew how it felt to lose someone to silence. He looked me in the eye and said, "You're not just a number to me anymore." That broke me a little, in a good way. And yet, there were nights I still couldn't sleep. Nights where the lights buzzed too loud, or a new detainee screamed out in their sleep. One night, someone tried to harm themselves. They were carried out on a stretcher. We never saw them again. The next morning, we all ate in silence. Even the guards didn't say much. I wrote letters to myself on those nights. Not to Clara, not to the judge, just to myself. I wrote what I would say if I ever got out. What I would do with my freedom. Who I would become. And I kept repeating one sentence in every letter. I deserve to be here. If you have ever doubted that you belonged, if someone ever made you feel disposable, I want you to say it out loud in the comments. I deserve to be here. And if this story is speaking to something hidden inside you, I hope you'll subscribe. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from answers. Sometimes it comes from knowing someone else finally sees what you've been carrying all along. The day of the evidentiary hearing started like any other. The same breakfast tray, the same plastic cup of lukewarm coffee, but everything inside me felt different. I hadn't slept. My palms wouldn't stop sweating. I kept rehearsing what I would say if they gave me a chance to speak. Clara said I probably wouldn't need to, that the evidence would speak loud enough. But still, I prepared. They brought me to a different room this time. It wasn't the cold gray holding area I was used to. This one had a table with clean surfaces, a bottle of water waiting for me, a quiet screen on the wall where the judge's face would appear. I sat down. My knee bounced uncontrollably. The guard beside me didn't speak, but I noticed he placed a small folded piece of paper on the corner of the desk before stepping back. I opened it. It was just one sentence, scrawled in awkward handwriting. "You've already made it further than they expected." I didn't know who wrote it. Maybe it was Dean. Maybe it was someone else who had been watching. But I folded that paper and tucked it into my pocket like it was armor. The judge appeared on screen. Clara was beside me, calm, composed, prepared. The government attorney logged in from a separate feed, stiff and unreadable. And then it began. Clara led with the financial timeline. She laid out every transaction from the moment I hired my original lawyer, the payment transfers, the unexplained deposits into accounts tied to my wife, the retainer, inconsistencies. She didn't just say it, she showed it, with color-coded spreadsheets and bank statements highlighted and labeled like a roadmap of betrayal. Then she presented the audio clips, voicemails from Allison, pieces of conversations where she spoke about letting things fall into place, where she laughed about me being too naive to notice. I couldn't even look at the screen while they played. It felt like someone peeling back my ribs, exposing a heart that had long since stopped trusting. Clara called 2 witnesses, a former paralegal from the same law firm, now working in a different city. She testified that certain cases were deliberately mishandled to speed up court dockets, that bonuses were quietly tied to cleared case volume, that the man who had once claimed to defend me had a reputation for quick deportations and never fighting appeals. The second witness was Officer Ramirez. He gave his statement with a steady voice, admitting what he had overheard, what he had seen. He didn't embellish. He simply confirmed what needed to be heard. And when he finished, he looked at me and nodded once. That small gesture said more than words ever could. Then it was the government's turn. Their attorney did not attack me directly. Instead, they tried to poke holes, suggested maybe I had misunderstood, that the financial documents could be explained, that the recordings might lack full context. But each objection felt thinner, weaker. Even the judge seemed unconvinced. Clara gave her closing remarks with quiet power. She said that even if every mistake wasn't criminal, they were still systemic, that I was a victim of carelessness at best and cruelty at worst, that people like me often fall through cracks designed to be invisible. And that justice only works when we have the courage to look at what has been ignored. When the judge spoke, I held my breath. He didn't issue a final ruling, but he said this: "Based on what I've seen today, I am inclined to believe that Mr. Monteiro has not received a fair hearing up to this point. I am granting a formal stay of removal while this case is re-evaluated, and I am requesting that the Department of Justice open an inquiry into the prior legal representation. This court owes the respondent the dignity of a process rooted in truth." Those words did not sound like victory. Sounded like breath, like oxygen, like the first crack in a wall that had held me in place for far too long. I was escorted back not in silence, but in something close to reverence. The guards didn't look through me anymore. Other detainees waited at the unit door. Jose hugged me so tight I couldn't speak. He just said, "They listened, hermano. They finally listened." That night, I wrote for hours. I wrote to my mother, even though I hadn't spoken to her in years. I wrote to the younger version of myself. I wrote to the men who had sat beside me during meals. I wrote to Allison, but didn't send it. I wrote because for the first time in a long time, I believed I would get to tell my story on my own terms. If you've ever had to fight just to be heard, if your truth has ever been doubted by those who hold power over you, I want you to write this in the comments. My voice matters. And if this journey has awakened something in you, or helped you feel seen, subscribe to this channel. Not for me, but for every person out there still waiting for their own story to be believed. I walked out of the courtroom escorted by guards, and the world felt different. The concrete under my shoes sounded louder than I remembered. Following that faint spark of hope, I'd learned that detention was more than 4 gray walls. It was the gap between the life you built and the one they forced you into. So when the van doors closed, and the engine roared, I didn't close my eyes. I watched. I felt every vibration. Because this wasn't just transport, it was transition. My return flight told a story of departure. The airport's sterile lights, the row of benches where families waited, the smell of burnt coffee and jet fuel, it all became part of the memory. Leaving the U.S. meant leaving behind routines built over years. My route to the hardware store, the morning greetings with the barista, the spray paint I used to touch up our apartment's doorframe. Most deportation stories focus on the moment of removal, but I found the most brutal scene is when the world you knew disappears first, and then you follow it. Back home in Brazil, I stepped off the plane holding a small roll of papers, my passport, a few photographs, a handwritten address from my mother's old journal. It was night. The humid air wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't ask for. And when my mother opened the door of her house in the small town, it was like seeing a stranger wearing your face. She cried. I hardly recognized the voice trembling behind the words, "My son." I had built a life in America, but paid the price by losing the one I had here. I started, again, from the street. Not metaphorically, I literally rolled up my sleeves and set up a small stand outside a market, selling pão de queijo early in the morning. The first morning I was out there, the smell of cheese baked into crisp dough filled my face. One bite after working the grill and shoving coins into my cup, I remembered the sound of drills and hammers I used to hold in Texas. Now I held a spatula, a fryer. The idea of starting over suddenly felt like building from ashes, but the taste was familiar. Work still grounded me. It reminded me I wasn't broken by the system. They were. At the stand, I met people who didn't know me. A neighbor from down the block stopped by each day and offered a glass of water. A little girl brought her grandmother's change and asked for 2 pieces of cheese bread. I realized the community didn't care about my deportation case, the lawyer who betrayed me, or the documents still buried in boxes. They only saw me stepping into their mornings selling something hot, and that was enough to feel human again. But everything I rebuilt was shadowed by what happened. I still had sleepless nights, where American highways haunted my dreams, the courtroom judge's voice echoed like a train whistle, and the van ride played on loop. Occasionally the phone rang. Journalists, lawyers, people who said they wanted my story. I said yes to some, no to others, because I was tired of being a case study. I was tired of being the immigrant deportation headline. I wanted to be Daniel, just Daniel. Then something changed. A producer from São Paulo asked if I'd appear in a documentary. The camera crew came, set up lights in the stand, asked me to talk about which dough recipe I used, why I moved to the US, and how I felt when they cuffed my wrists. My voice cracked. The microphone captured a tear I didn't feel until later. Watching the playback later, I saw the moment when the spatula paused mid-air. My eyes flicked down at the bread, and I swallowed. That moment became the frame they chose for the opening scene. Seeing myself on screen made me realize something new. Survival isn't always about moving on. Sometimes it's about turning back. My body had walked back across continents, but my soul was still in the courtroom, still waiting for someone to say, "We got it wrong." When I agreed to the documentary, I didn't sign up for fame. I signed up for truth. My story would be small in comparison to the millions of immigration stories, but that gave it value. It meant I held a thread of something bigger. I still visit the U.S. Scholars, activists, and lawyers call my case a moment of reckoning in immigration advocacy. I don't feel like a symbol. I feel like a man who was betrayed and found a way to remember. The book I dreamed of writing, the business I never started in Texas, they are still ideas tucked in a drawer. But now I carry them not as regrets, but maps. My mother once told me that we plant seeds even when we cannot see the tree. I planted those seeds in a country that didn't expect me to grow. And now I'm planting them in a place where people see my roots, not just my scars. If you've ever felt you lost everything you built because someone else made the rules, I want you to write in the comments, "I will build again," and if this journey resonates, join our community by clicking subscribe, because your story deserves as much space as mine. And together, our voices can turn the silence into something solid. 2 years have passed since that courtroom, yet sometimes I still wake up hearing the echo of the gavel. It's strange how sound can stay in your bones long after the moment ends, but I don't wake up afraid anymore. I wake up grateful. I wake up breathing. And that alone already feels like a victory. When I look back at the man I was, the one in the orange jumpsuit, the one holding his head in his hands, believing he had lost everything, I almost don't recognize him. But I honor him, because he survived enough for me to exist. Every scar, every sleepless night, every humiliation carved something inside me that no one can take away. Strength, yes, but also clarity. I know now that freedom isn't a place. It's a decision you make every day to stand tall in the truth, even when it costs you everything. After my story was told publicly, things changed. The lawyer who betrayed me lost his license. The woman who once called herself my wife reached out again. Her letter came through the embassy. Wrote pages this time. Apologies, explanations, regret. She said she couldn't sleep knowing what she had done, that she lived every day haunted by my face as they led me away. I read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in a box with the rest of the past. I didn't need revenge. The silence of my forgiveness would be punishment enough. Now I work with organizations that help immigrants who face the same horrors I did. I sit across from them in small offices, looking into their terrified eyes, and I tell them what I wish someone had told me back then. You are not a mistake. You are a person. I help them find legal aid, housing, and sometimes just a reason to hope again. I don't have a degree in law or social work. What I have is experience. The kind that burns you and teaches you to carry light in the ashes. The little food stand I opened has grown into something bigger. It's not just mine anymore. It's run by people who've lost something and are trying to rebuild. We serve bread and stories. Customers sit at the counter and ask questions about the man behind the news headlines. I tell them I am just Daniel, a man who was broken and decided not to stay that way. Sometimes reporters ask me what justice feels like. I tell them justice doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like peace, the kind that arrives quietly after the storm. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't erase the past. It just allows you to breathe again without fear. And when I walk through the streets of my town now, I see faces that remind me of my journey. The migrant workers waiting at bus stops, the women selling fruit under the sun, the children running barefoot through the dust. I see pieces of myself in all of them. I used to think I was invisible, but I was wrong. I was always seen, just not by the right eyes. On the anniversary of my return, I went to the ocean, alone. I stood barefoot at the edge of the water, watching the waves crash and retreat. Each one left behind a thin trace of foam that disappeared just as quickly as it came. And I realized something simple. Maybe life isn't about holding on to what you've built. Maybe it's about learning to stand in what remains when everything else has been washed away. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. Not for revenge, not for pity, for peace, for everyone still waiting in those cells, for those who never made it home, for the countless stories that will never be told, and for the courage to keep telling mine, not as a wound, but as a warning and a light. If you've walked through fire and still have the strength to love again, write in the comments, "I survived," because that single sentence can remind someone else that survival is possible. And if this story touched something deep inside you, subscribe to this channel. Here, every story matters. Every voice deserves to be heard. And I promise you, no matter how dark your road feels right now, there is always another sunrise waiting for you. Listening to my story. Thank you for standing with me through the silence, through the fear, through the redemption. You didn't just watch, you walked beside me. And that means more than you'll ever know. Now, before you go, take a deep breath. You made it to the end of this chapter. But there are others waiting. Stories of hope, courage, and survival, just like this one. Click on the next video that's appearing on your screen right now. Keep listening, keep feeling, keep believing. Because sometimes the act of hearing someone else's truth is how we find our own. Thank you, truly, for being here. I'm Daniel Monteiro, and this was my story of loss, truth, and rebirth.